Hey everyone. So, I'm recording this on May 20th, and film and geek Twitter exploded today over the news that the fabled Snyder Cut is actually getting released. This is, of course, the version of the movie Justice League that Zack Snyder, who is he's still the credited director of the finished film, but he was originally the creative force behind this and sort of the DCEU in general. And then he had to leave. He either had to leave production or he was fired prior to this happening. But his daughter passed away, and then he was kicked off. And then Joss Whedon, who directed the first two Avenger movies, known for Firefly, Buffy, all that stuff, was brought in to do reshoots and tweak some stuff about the movie, story-wise, color palette, tone, everything that people didn't like about Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. He was kind of trying to retinker this movie of. And then the finished version of Justice League, the theatrical cut, I guess as we can call it now, it sucked. It sucked pretty bad. I would argue it was slightly less sucky than Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, because that movie is a trash fucking dumpster fire, but it's still pretty bad. But it was really weird. I thought it was always kind of weird that after that movie came out and nobody liked it, people who didn't like the DC movies before and the people who did like the DC movies before sort of joined forces into not liking this theatrical cut, which had many, many problems that other people have gone into the minutia of it, and I won't get into it here, but it's terrible. Obviously, the bad CGI covering Henry Cavill's mustache was sort of the one that became a meme, but yeah, it was bad. So, it was always really weird that people were pushing for Zack Snyder's original vision, because Zack Snyder sucks. I mean, there's no way I can really put it, and the DCEU movies up to that point had also all uniformly sucked. Okay, so some people will defend Wonder Woman as a movie. I will not. I did not like that movie at all. I recognize that I am in the minority of people who don't like Gal Gadot at all. I think she has the acting talent of a department store mannequin. Alright, well, I mean, the Palestinian people probably don't like her, but aside from the Palestinians and myself, most people seem to like Gal Gadot. I can't stand the woman. Well, after her Imagine All the People song, a lot more people also have that feeling, but I really did not like the movie Wonder Woman at all. I found very little to like about it. But people seem to like it. There's a sequel that may or may not be coming out in August, depending on COVID-19. I might still see that because of the 80s thing, but, you know. But besides that, you had Man of Steel, also directed by Zack Snyder, and was sort of set the bad groundwork for the whole DCEU. You had Suicide Squad, which obviously had its own issues, and now is getting sort of a soft reboot. Well, there's a lot of stuff going on with the DCEU, but it just seemed so weird that people were like, oh, well, this theatrical version of Justice League was bad, but you know, Zack Snyder, the man who brought us Man of Steel in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and the one who set the whole groundwork for the DCU, his original vision was actually a good film, you see? It's like, wow. But let's talk about Zack Snyder. So, Zack Snyder's first feature film, was the Dawn of the Dead reboot, which was written by James Gunn. James Gunn has since gone on to become... I think this was one of James Gunn's first movies as a screenwriter for a non-trauma film. It was like this and like the Scooby-Doo movies. Obviously, the Scooby-Doo movies are their own thing, but James Gunn, in general, I mean, Romeo and Juliet's a really fun movie. I really like that. It's probably my favorite trauma movie, either that or Poltergeist. And they were doing this reboot of Dawn of the Dead, which Zack Snyder became the director of, and while that's obviously not nearly as good as the original Dawn of the Dead, which is probably my favorite horror film of all time, it's a close call between that and Martyrs, but definitely my first, like, classic quote-unquote horror film, definitely my favorite. So the reboot was never going to live up to those standards, but I thought it was fine. They kept the mall setting, and they changed basically everything else about it. The only problem I have with that movie is a screenwriting thing, where they're safe in this mall, and the only reason they leave to begin the third act is because they just kind of feel like it. There's no compelling incident that forces them to leave the safety of the mall. They're just idiots. So aside from that stupid decision that does not need to happen to make the third act happen, I think that's a solid reboot. And Zack Snyder did a fine job directing it. I think some of the contrasty visuals, I mean, they could have used a little different of a color palette, but at least it didn't become the horrendous color palette that Zack Snyder would be known for later. And then his second movie was 300. And 300 is a movie I fucking despise. I hate 300. It's one of the few movies I've given an F to, and that's because I view the movie, based on the time it came out and based on the content of the film and things that happen in it, as being a pro-Iraq war film, and I find that message to be more reprehensible, and I'd have to do like a whole video deconstructing why that's my read of it, because I don't think anyone else has made that argument before. I haven't checked any film scholarly articles, which may, but I hate it. But aside from, even if I'm way off on the meaning and that's not what the film is saying, that movie is, visually, it is awful to look at. Like, aesthetically, it is an ugly, ugly film. It was one of those movies where almost all of the sets and backgrounds are green screen and none of it's real. I mean, that pretty much only worked in Sin City and has never worked since. But at that, there's horrible, like, slow motion, fast up, zooms in slow motion. It's just awful, awful. I hate that movie. Gerard Butler overacting, and it's... I know that a lot of people like that movie. I mean, it had a sequel or a prequel that came out years later with, what's her name, Eva Green. So it obviously has a fan base, but I fucking despise 300. I hate that movie with a passion. There is one other movie Zack Snyder did make that I liked, which was the Watchmen adaptation. I thought that was about as good of as an adaptation you could get of Watchmen as a single theatrical feature. Granted, I mean, they got rid of the squid, and so the ending doesn't have as much of a punch and doesn't quite make as much sense if it's just Dr. Manhattan and not the squid. And the HBO sequel series that came out, I haven't seen every episode of that. I've only seen like clips and bits and pieces of it, but they were able to incorporate the squid into that. So I kind of wish Zack Snyder had just gone ahead and made the squid. I mean, even if you're arguing, you know, the 3-hour movie didn't have enough room for it, I mean, Zack Snyder always makes extended editions of all his fucking movies because of his ego, so... but otherwise, I think I did like Watchmen. I mean, I know a lot of people dislike that the film is more true to the visuals of the comic as opposed to being true to the themes. It's a bit too stuffy in how it tries to faithfully recreate, like, frame after frame of the comic, but I was fine with that. After so many adaptations of things I like that go off in weird directions and aren't faithful, seeing a movie that was really faithful, aside from upping the violence and some of the gore, I enjoyed it. So I'm fine with the Watchmen movie. But Sucker Punch is bad, man. Sucker Punch is one of the greatest examples of a movie having a different message than what the filmmakers intended. It was obvious that Zack Snyder and the people involved with that film thought they were making some sort of female empowerment movie. And what they ended up making was the most misogynist piece of crap I've seen, which maybe... You know, a movie isn't always arguing for what the filmmakers think it's arguing for. Movies can have messages out that are the opposite of what a filmmaker intends, as in, I believe, what happened with Sucker Punch. I don't think they were setting out to make a misogynist film. Sometimes a movie can have a message that no one was intending just because of, you know, the sort of cultural zeitgeist or milieu around the making of it. Sometimes, you know, what a movie ends up saying is not always within the control of the filmmakers, and that is a prime example. Sucker Punch is horrible. I think I'm forgetting, oh, he made that Owl movie, I've never seen it, I don't know. And then you get this DCEU stuff, and it was obvious that Warner Brothers, owning one of the two big comic book companies, the other one is Marvel, which is now owned by Disney, they were seeing that Disney and Marvel were making all this money with their MCU, and they're like, hey, we have some superheroes too. People love Batman, Superman, and our other ones. Full disclosure, I read a lot more DC comics as a kid than Marvel, so I have more of an affinity for those characters. They just haven't done really well, aside from Batman. And you could argue the first two, or the first 1.5 Superman movies from the 70s, DC characters have not translated to film as well, or they have not been translated to film as well. Doesn't mean they can't, just luck of the draw. And so, after Christopher Nolan ended his trilogy, which had 2 very solid movies and 1 mediocre movie, Warner Brothers wanted to get into the cinematic universe superhero business. And they were going to do a couple things different, based on the sort of creative impetus of Zack Snyder, and to a far lesser extent Chris Nolan, who did like some producery stuff on Man of Steel. And that was they were going to make it dark and not as light and fluffy as the Marvel movies are, which are very clearly meant to be mass entertainment. And supposedly they were going to make it more auteur-friendly, so that each individual film would have more of its director's voice than some of the Marvel movies, which Marvel has corrected this. I mean, what's his name, Taika Waititi, when he made Thor Ragnarok, that obviously has a bit more of his voice in it. And Guardians of the Galaxy certainly has James Gunn's voice, speaking of Gunn. Funny thing that he's making the next Suicide Squad movie as well. But for a while, a lot of the Marvel movies felt like they could have been directed by anybody, like cookie-cutter stuff, and even the ones directed by the Russos, you don't really feel a voice there. They just sort of feel like generic studio product. Good studio product. I like most of the Marvel movies. But they don't really have a thriving voice of their own. Until recently, Marvel started to get more director voice into their films lately, and hopefully that will continue, so that they feel less like studio assembly line kind of stuff. Well, I guess the voice of the Marvel movies has been Kevin Feige, the producer who sort of overruns it, so, but each movie has kind of felt not like, they're still very uniform. There's not a lot of diversity in those Marvel movies. I mean, granted, you have, like, Ant-Man, which is like a heist movie, and Guardians of the Galaxy, which is a space opera, so they tend to be a little disparate in genres. Winter Soldier, which is still my favorite Marvel movie, is like a 70s conspiracy thriller, kind of like a Blowout or a Conversation, but with action. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what they were going with. So Warner Brothers was trying to, or at least ostensibly, they were going to be a bit more of that. So the problem with the idea of making it darker or more serious, that's fine if you know what that means. And Zack Snyder is not a good enough filmmaker to know what that means. Christopher Nolan, who, you know, whatever my problems are with some of Christopher Nolan's more recent films, and none of them are bad, by the way. I haven't seen a Christopher Nolan film I've actually disliked, but I have various issues with Interstellar and Inception, mostly on a screenplay level. He's certainly a fine director. I have no issues with his directorial skills. It's mostly screenplay stuff, which he doesn't always have as much of a hand in, though. He has, you know, his brother writes some stuff when he's not busy on Westworld, that kind of thing. But long story short, Christopher Nolan at least knows how to make a movie that is dark visually and thematically in the right way, and Zack Snyder does not. So when he kicked off this universe with Man of Steel, I mean, one, if you're going to make a dark superhero movie, Superman's probably not the one to start with, because Superman is meant to be sort of the light, patriotic counterpoint, and there are ways to smartly undercut that, like Superman Red Son and some other stories in there. Or the famous comic book where he kills, like, Zod and the other three Kryptonians. I have that issue, too, from, like, the 70s. It's nowhere near mint condition, but it's still nice to have. So there's a way to take that Superman, and you can undercut it, you can do different things. I mean, it's, despite the fact that he's pretty much a god, there's still things you can do on a storytelling level that still address the current state of affairs. It doesn't have to be all smiley and happy, the Hall of Justice old cartoon kind of thing, Super Friends. There's ways you can do that, but Man of Steel didn't. It just tried to... It was basically a poor imitation of Christopher Nolan doing Superman, and it wasn't very good. I mean, Henry Cavill was well cast. I have no problem with Henry Cavill in that role. Amy Adams, aside from not looking like the comic book Lois Lane, did a fine job. Yeah, I'm even fine with Kevin Costner as Pa Kent, even though he's not really the Pa Kent of the comic books. I even like Michael Shannon going over the top as I Will Find Him Zod. But the movie just didn't do what it needed to do because Zack Snyder didn't know how to approach Superman. And also, taking out all of the color and desaturating it to the point where you might as well just film the movie in black and white is not very fun to look at. Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, those movies are also very dark visually, but they had aside from the fact that Nolan's there, they either had a better cinematographer or they just knew how to color time it better. So that, like, Batman Begins, it has a lot of good earth tones, it has a lot of browns, it has a lot of greens, it has a lot of ambers. Even though it's dark, it's still nice to visually look at. Dark Knight skews a bit more on, like, blue tones in places, but it doesn't look oppressively gunmetal gray like like one of the Riddick movies or something, or at least the last two Riddick movies. Pitch Black is better. And then that just sort of just get the ball in motion for the wrong way to approach this stuff. I mean, yeah, I have a million complaints about how Zack Snyder treats Batman with all the guns and making him crazy and all that shit. But Man of Steel did not get things off to a good start. And then Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is fucking garbage, man. That is so bad. I mean, plenty of other people have made videos saying every little thing that is wrong with that movie's nonsensical plot, its approach to the characters, crazy, like, Zack Snyder just did nothing to try and rein in Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor. It is a total mess. That movie is so bad. And it seems like there's some people who still like Dawn of Justice, or maybe they're like, oh, well, the R-rated extended cut is better. It's like, the extended cut is like 5 scenes of Jenna Malone added. Why is it any better? So some people do like that movie, but no one I've talked to does. It's just some random people on the internet. It might be just Zack Snyder's bots or whatever. And then after Batman v Superman got kind of a bad rap, it seems like Warner Brothers was rushing to fix things, so you had a couple movies that were already in production that they tried to tweak a little bit. Suicide Squad was tweaked to be a bit more like the Comic-Con trailer than what the actual film was. Suicide Squad is also not a good movie, but it's still more enjoyable than Man of Steel and Dawn of Justice. Mostly it was Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn that sort of made that. I hated Enchantress dancing around like she's fucking Gozer from Ghostbusters at the end, another Skybeam. Jared Leto's Gigolo Joker is fucking horrible. Yeah, if I wanted Post Malone Joker, that was a horrible conception. I don't know if that was Leto, I don't know if that was David Ayer, but that was a really bad way. And Jared Leto gets a lot of shit, but he is a legitimately good actor in a lot of things. He's in Fight Club, American Psycho, Requiem for a Dream, Dallas Buyers Club. Give him the right material, he's a really good actor. Yeah, I've heard that he's a terrible person in real life, that he's just a jerk and everything. Even people I know who have legitimately met him in a first person, so I'm not just talking about rumors either. I know people who have actually met him and have told me he is a jerk in real life. I don't know. I've never met him. It doesn't really matter as long as he's not doing anything like Harvey Weinstein-ish. If he's just kind of a jerk, whatever. But given the right material, he's a good actor. I have no idea how Morbius is going to turn out, but that was a horrible conception for the Joker. So yeah, and then Wonder Woman I just thought was boring and bland and uninteresting and just bad. And the third act is just another yawn-inducing. Or that stupid scene where she's running across like the front lines of the war and they're shooting and she's deflecting with her wrists, and it's like, you're just standing up walking. Is no one aiming below your waist level? No one's shooting out your kneecaps that are unprotected? There's a lot I hated about that. So they did try to tweak them and make them quote unquote lighter, both like visually, with the color palettes and in tone. And you can see a lot of that in the later DC movies, so post-Justice League, I guess, or even in the midst of Justice League. Because obviously Justice League, they added a lot of the Joss Whedon-type humor, which doesn't quite work in that movie, mainly because they're trying to make the Flash in that movie their sort of Spider-Man character, but the actor they have to play him, Ezra Miller, just looks like a school shooter. So all I could think about is these jokes are being cracked by, we need to talk about Kevin. And it didn't, he was very miscast. I don't know, didn't he just choke a woman in Scandinavia recently as I'm recording this, so I don't know if he's still going to be in the Flash movie. The Flash movie that's had like 9 different directors and has been pushed back 17 times. But he was terribly miscast. Cyborg was bland. Supposedly there's more stuff about him in the Snyder Cut. But after that, it seems that the movies have gotten better. I didn't bother seeing Aquaman, but I hear people liked it. And then I did go to see Shazam, and I did legitimately like Shazam. Shazam is the first movie of the DCEU that I have legitimately enjoyed as a movie. And maybe it's because it's different. It's still a little weirdly dark-colored, but at least they did bring out, like, the red of his suit. They did add enough humor so that it's still funny without being too jokey. It had some decent characters in it. It was a fun movie. I enjoyed it. It's not great, but it's a fun movie. And I like the villain in the Seven Deadly Sins, even though you can't tell which goblin is which sin. So they seem to be course-correcting now, and maybe they needed someone like a Kevin Feige at Warner Brothers, because Zack Snyder was just kind of running them into the ground, but I don't know. But regardless, maybe you have different opinions about those movies, maybe you like the DC movies, whatever. I mean, if you totally like the DC movies and think there's nothing wrong with them, you've probably shut this off already. But if you're sort of like me, and I would say most people in the quote-unquote mainstream that saw these movies, they're at best underwhelming and at worst horrible. So I've never really understood why this release the Snyder Cut thing happened. Why would people think that the guy who set the horrible precedent for this shitty series of movies would have made a better original version? Now, granted, any movie that is one cohesive vision as opposed to two different visions Frankenstein together, like Spookies, I have a spooky slipcover you probably can't see, is going to be better in a cohesive state because it's going to feel like one movie. But it's not going to be a good movie in and of itself. It's just going to be a better version of a piece of shit because it's going to be more cohesive. And look, the history of film is riddled with movies that were released in a compromised form, either because the studio messed with them, or the producers messed with them, or the MPAA ratings board messed with them. And off the top of my head, I can already list a bunch of movies I would rather see the director's original vision for. Starting, the granddaddy of them is Orson Welles' The Magnificent Ambersons, the film he made after Citizen Kane. But of course, when you start to, any movie that was released prior to the advent of Laserdisc and more so DVD, most of any deleted scenes or any footage like that was tossed out the window unless they needed it for a TV cut, because nothing ever happened with them. So a lot of that footage is destroyed or lost or anything like that. So unless some private collector ended up finding it at an auction or stole it from a film warehouse, most of that stuff you're not gonna get anymore. Which is why I guess Zack Snyder's lucky that his movie's made in the modern day where everything's just on a hard drive, and Warner Brothers is apparently spending $20 to $30 million to take his print and make it a finished, watchable movie. And I'm thinking, 30 million, can't you make like 6 independent films? You can make 6 Blumhouse movies for that, and at least 3 of them will probably be decent. But whatever. I mean, considering all the other money they've already thrown into that, and both versions of Justice League, it's a drop in the bucket to get HBO Max subscribers, which is where this movie's going to go. It's either going to be a movie or a miniseries on HBO Max to help with their, which, despite the fact that it has HBO in the title, it's Warner Brothers streaming service. Warner Brothers owns HBO, so Warner Brothers is basically dumping all of their movies and TV shows and properties onto this and calling it HBO Max, but they might as well just call it Warner Brothers streaming. But there are so many movies that deserve this treatment that aren't, because at the end of the day, this Justice League is also going to suck. I mean, look, if it ends up being a good movie, I'll make another video and I'll eat my words and hey, it's the first, yeah. But it's not. And you know it's not. Honestly, do you, and I'm talking to whoever's watching this, like, my videos only get like 30 views, but you know it's not going to be a good movie. But, you know, there's so many other movies that deserve this. Even movies that aren't all that good, but are still better. Paul W.S. Anderson's Event Horizon, that had, like, some footage that was cut out of it. Wes Craven's Cursed, that movie, they filmed a movie, the fucking Weinsteins and the assholes of Dimension didn't like it, so we had to refilm a whole new movie, so the version we got is almost completely different as well. And I'm sure, I mean, considering they eventually released Halloween 6, the producer's cut, which is another famous, you know, original cut that was bootlegged for a long time before it got an official release, I'm sure whoever owns Dimension now, I mean, it used to be Bob Weinstein, it's probably in turnaround now from bankruptcy, but whoever owns Dimension now, they could release the Craven cut of Cursed. Or other movies. I mentioned Spookies. Spookies was a movie called Twisted Souls. The producer didn't like it, hired some porn director to film a bunch of shitty stuff, and they mashed them together. So half the movie is Twisted Souls, and half the movie is this piece of shit. The Twisted Souls cut of Spookies. I mean, if Vinegar Syndrome couldn't find it, it's probably gone. Cobra, the Sylvester Stallone action movie, that had like half an hour that was cut out of it or something. I mean, Shout Factory couldn't find that, so I'm sure that's gone too. I'm trying to think of this. I'm sure there's even more that I'm forgetting right now as far as alternate cuts of movies. Friday the 13th Part 7 that had all of John Carl Buechler's gore cut out. I mean, it only exists in like VHS quality work prints because Paramount destroyed the unedited footage. But if somebody was able to find that and clean it up, I mean, if no one's found it now, they're never going to find it. I mean, that's just the movies that were shot and completed and had shit ruined. What about the films that, the studio tampered with the screenplay and we never filmed that? Why can't we go back and film that stuff? I mean, there's so many other movies that deserve it. Joe Berlinger's Blair Witch 2, Book of Shadows. There's so many movies that deserve this treatment. Oh, I'm forgetting one of the ones I've always wanted. Kevin Yeager's Hellraiser 4, the one where Pinhead goes to space. I mean, don't tell me that's a stupid version to get the director's original vision of, because he took his name off and put Alan Smithy. It's one of the last movies to have Alan Smithy as a director credit, by the way. I think Joe Esterhouse's an Alan Smithy film, Burn Hollywood Burn, might be the actual legitimate last one. I'd have to check the IMDb credit. But Hellraiser 4, Bloodline, yeah, because, again, Dimension Films, which fucked with so many horror movies. They did that, and but that film, no one wants that but me, really, but, the actual director's cut of Hellraiser Bloodlines. Or how about just Kevin Williamson's version of Scream 4 without the shitty Aaron Kruger ending to it? Or how about Kevin Williamson's original treatment for Scream 3 instead of Aaron Kruger's finished one? So help me God, if they hire Aaron Kruger to touch any part of Scream 5 when it films, heads are gonna roll. Stop giving Aaron Kruger work. Just everyone in Hollywood. If anyone and any power to hire screenwriters is watching this, stop giving Aaron Kruger work. He wrote one good movie called Arlington Road, and everything else he's written has been shit. So, long story short, I am not excited about this stupid Snyder's cut of Justice League. It's still going to be Justice League, and it's still going to be Zack Snyder. It's still going to be a bad director making a bad movie based on a bad set of ideas and conceptions of what this should be. And, whatever. It'll be a fun curiosity. I remember when the people who own The Exorcist, years ago, they made an Exorcist prequel. They had Paul Schrader, the director of First Reformed, writer of Taxi Driver, usually a good filmmaker. He's made some duds too. But he made a prequel to The Exorcist, but they found it to be too slow and too much of an introspective drama. So then they filmed a completely different movie to be a prequel to The Exorcist, directed by Rennie Harlan, who directed Nightmare on Elm Street 4 and Die Hard 2, and a lot of stuff like that. And they released that second one in theaters, and they eventually released the first one on video. I've never seen the Paul Schrader version, which is called Dominion now. But I've seen the Rennie Harlan one, which is not very good. It's not very good. I hear the Schrader one isn't very good either, but, So it's probably going to be like that, where we're going to have a theatrical Frankenstein cut that's half Joss Whedon and half Zack Snyder, and then we're going to have a full cut that is full Zack Snyder. And both of them are going to suck, and at the end of the day, what we're getting... We have a Wonder Woman sequel coming out. Who knows if that'll be good. Probably not, but people like the first one, who aren't me or Palestinian children. I don't know. Are we getting a Shazam sequel? I wouldn't mind one. We're getting an Aquaman 2, because Aquaman was a hit. And we're getting a Suicide Squad sequel/reboot. And as far as stuff... Oh, and there was that Birds of Prey Harley Quinn movie, which was very mediocre. It's not terrible, but it's not good at all. Yeah, that's all I'll say about that. Well, Ewan McGregor looked like he was having fun. It's not really Black Mask from the comics, but he was having fun. So good for you, Ewan McGregor. But yeah, I didn't like it. So, I mean, none of that's Margot Robbie's fault, by the way. She is almost perfectly cast as Harley Quinn. She's just not given the material for it. I'm hoping James Gunn, who I usually like his work, Super, Slither, Romeo and Juliet, as I mentioned. Even that weird thing about the pervert cat at the end of movie 43. Yeah, I saw movie 43. So, I like stuff. Lolly Love is kind of fun. I like James Gunn. So, hopefully he will take the Suicide Squad and do something good with it. And then that might set a nice precedent for DC movies going forward. But still, when you look at Aquaman, and you look at Shazam, and even if you look at Birds of Prey, even though Birds of Prey is not good, the movies have only gotten better once Zack Snyder has been pushed off. I don't know, he might be a producer in name only to some of those movies, but generally he's not a creative force behind the DCEU anymore, and they've gotten substantially better since he's gone away. They still have room to improve. They're still not up to Marvel level or up to good movie level. I like Shazam. And Aquaman might be good. Again, I haven't seen it. But they're getting there. They're getting there. So, whatever. So, I don't know, leave a comment below. Did you like any of these movies that I didn't like from Zack Snyder and the DC movies? Are you excited about the Snyder Cut? Do you know what the hell I'm talking about? I mean, most people in the film world do. I don't know if the layman does. I don't know. Just let me know. Maybe I'm off kilter and my opinion is completely different from what everyone else's is, but I don't care. I'll probably at some point see the one out of curiosity, and then, you know, that